So it's Thursday night, or whenever your worship rehearsal is. It's about an hour before, maybe a half an hour before, and ding, you get a text on your phone. And it's from one of your worship team members, and they say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't make it to worship team rehearsal tonight, but don't worry, I'll be there on Sunday morning. Do you still let those people lead worship with you on Sunday morning? I'm going to share with you in this video why you might not want to let them lead worship with you on Sunday morning if they can't make it to worship rehearsal. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. Before we get into things, make sure to check out the link in the top of the description below to a free PDF I put together called The Worship Rehearsal Blueprint. If you are a worship team leader and you want to lead your worship team well, one of the best times to do that is during your worship rehearsal. But there's 5 key things that you must have in place to have the perfect worship rehearsal. So in that PDF I lead you through, I show you this blueprint that I put together to have the perfect worship rehearsal that leads your team well relationally, spiritually, and of course musically, so they're prepared to lead worship on Sunday as well. So check that out in the description below. But other than that, let's get into it, because today we're talking about worship team members who don't come to worship rehearsal. And the example that I gave at the beginning of this video, that was like, sometimes we let that slide, right? We listen to somebody and they say, I can't make it tonight, but I'll be there on Sunday. And there are people who usually come to worship rehearsals during the week, and so we let it slide. We're going to address that later in this video and what you should do in that circumstance, but let's think about it more in the more egregious acts of missing worship rehearsal. For instance, maybe there's somebody who wants to join your worship team, and so they aren't officially on the team yet, but you're walking them through the process, and they realize, oh, rehearsals are on Thursday nights, and I can't make it on Thursday nights. And then they say to you, well, I still want to be on the worship team. What do? Do you say, okay, well, you work on Thursday nights, so I understand you can still lead with me on Sundays? Or do you say something else? And in this video, I'm going to share with you why I think if somebody can't make it to worship rehearsal, they shouldn't be able to play on Sunday. If someone can't make it to worship rehearsal, they shouldn't be able to play on Sunday. Hear me out on this one. Before we get there, though, I want to hear from you. Do you allow people who can't make it to worship rehearsals on whenever your worship rehearsal is? Do you allow them to play with you on Sunday? Do you allow them to lead worship with you on Sunday? Let me know in the comments below. I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your answer down below. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. I'm just sharing my opinion here. This is what I think about worship team members who can't come to worship rehearsals. Should they be allowed to play on Sunday? First of all, let me just say, no. I don't believe that worship team members who can't make it to worship rehearsal should play on a Sunday morning. I don't allow worship team members who don't make it to rehearsals to play with me on Sunday mornings. No matter how bad I need a drummer or a bass player or whatever instrument, if someone can't make it to worship rehearsal, I don't let them lead with me on Sunday. And so I want to share with you my reasons why. I'm not just being mean in this. I think that there are actual reasons why. And the first reason is this. I want you to think about your worship team as if it were like a sports team, right? And think about this analogy, and it makes so much more sense if you think about it this way. And it's the same thing. Imagine you're a coach of, let's say, a baseball team, and you have some player who wants to be on your baseball team, and they say, hey, coach, I'm super excited about baseball. I'm really excited to play with you guys. I almost said worship leading. Baseball is my passion. Baseball is what I was called to. Here's the problem, though, coach. I know you practice a couple times a week. I can't make it to those practices. But every time you have a game, I promise I will be there. I'm going to be ready to go. I'll even put in the work on my own time right? Like I'll be out in my backyard hitting baseballs. I'll be at the batting cages. I'll be, I don't know what other people do to practice baseball, but whatever people do to practice baseball, I'll be there. I'll be ready to do it. I just can't make practices. If you were the coach, you'd be like, I'm sorry, if you can't make practices, you can't play with me, right? And the same is true for worship team ministries, right? If you can't make practices, you can't play in the game. And I'm not reducing Sunday morning experiences down to a game, but that's essentially the same context, right? Like that is when all of the practice that you put in pays off. On Sunday morning, you show up, and we're talking just really musically, I guess a little bit spiritually here as well. All of that preparation you put in pays off on Sunday morning when you step on stage and lead your church. But you can't just show up during game day after not having practiced with the team, because this is a team sport. Baseball is a team sport. Basketball is a team sport. Football is a team sport. If you were on a team and you didn't practice with them, you wouldn't know what the playbook is, right? You wouldn't know what you're doing whenever you actually get on the field. Just like on your worship team, you don't know how to work with those other musicians. You don't know what the playbook is. You don't know, you might know what songs you're doing and what parts you're supposed to be playing, but you don't know how that all interacts. There's so many dynamics with the rest of your teammate. So you can't just show up and just expect to just slide in and everything's going to work perfectly. If you miss practice, you can't play in the game. And the same is true for your worship team. At least that's my view. If you miss rehearsal, you didn't rehearse with us, you can't play in the game. You can't lead with us on Sunday. Let's move on to reason number 2. And that brings us to reason number 2, why people who can't come to worship rehearsals can't play on Sunday mornings with me, and my team at least, is because worship, as we know, we say it all the time to ourselves, worship is more than just music. When we are leading worship on Sunday mornings, yes, we're leading musical worship, and that's a big piece of it. That's what we focus on a lot of the times. But there's so much more outside of that musical element of leading worship that we need to practice. And if we don't practice that, then we won't be prepared to lead worship. Leading worship isn't just I can sit at home and learn my guitar parts, or I can sit at home and learn my harmonies. It's actually a spiritual act. We need to be preparing for it. So that's the first part of it. Being on the worship team is more than just music. You can't just show up and know your music and be ready to lead worship. There's more to it than that. But then there's also the team aspect of it, like I was talking about before. But this goes even deeper than just knowing how your team interacts with each other. Like, we want to be a team. We want to be a family. We want to work as one unit together. And the only way to do that is to regularly meet together. And if half of the team is meeting, or more than half of the team, everybody but one person is meeting regularly throughout the week, and then they show up on Sunday, they are formed and bonded in a way that's much deeper than what that one person who just kind of slides in and plays their part and then leaves on Sunday is. Being on a worship team is about more than just music. Plus, if somebody shows up on Sunday mornings, but your whole structure, like I talk about in the worship rehearsal blueprint linked down in the description below, if your whole structure is built on building up your team, not just musically, but spiritually and relationally, if all of those 3 pieces are done at worship rehearsal, then this one team member who doesn't show up at your worship rehearsal is not going to be built up in the same way, spiritually and relationally and musically, that the other members of your team are. So that's why it's so important that worship team members come to worship rehearsal. Please, if you are on a worship team, come to worship rehearsals. We need you there. There's more to being on a worship team than just music. And finally, number 3, This isn't really a reason. This is just a thought that I have about people not showing up to worship rehearsal. Let's go back to that example that I talked about at the beginning of this video, where somebody, maybe they usually come, but they just can't make it for a week. There's something came up and they can't make it to worship rehearsal. They'll be there on Sunday, but they can't make it to worship rehearsal. And this is really hard for me because I want to show grace, right? We want to show grace. And it's not like we're mad at the person. So I don't even know if grace is the right word. Maybe we just really want this person to play with us. And so for me, I know it's been difficult in the past when somebody says, I can't make it to worship rehearsal today, but I'll be there on Sunday. I want to be like, you know what? You're good. Like you know what you're doing. You come to worship rehearsals regularly. That's fine. And I've done that before, and I will probably do that in the future. But the more I think about it, if we are building a sustainable worship ministry where expectations are set and met and kept and people are held accountable to them, then the answer has to be no. Because I know in my worship team guidelines, it says if you are not able to make it to worship rehearsal, you will not play on Sunday with us. And so to throw an exception in there for somebody, I just feel like it belittles the expectation. And then other people see that, and maybe the drummer who's really good, and he could play whatever because he doesn't have to learn the chords to the song. He's just playing a beat. There's more to drumming than that, I know. But you're just playing a beat, right? Maybe they could get away with skipping a worship rehearsal. But then it becomes so much more complicated whenever you have a guitar player who's relatively new and they're like, you know, I saw the drummer was out last week and he played on Sunday. I can't make it this Thursday, but I'll be there on Sunday. And then what do you do? Because you know that guitar player is not going to be ready to lead on Sunday if they miss rehearsal. It just becomes so much more complicated. And that's why I find it easier to just have the expectation set. Everybody knows it in advance. You put it in your worship team guidelines. You talk about it. You reinforce it by holding people to the expectation. If you are not at worship rehearsal, you can't play on Sunday. Or maybe can't isn't the right word. Maybe a nicer way to say it is you won't play on Sunday. We will find another way to fill your role, or we'll do without you. And it doesn't have to be mean. You can explain everything that I just explained to you, to your worship team, about how being on a worship team is more than just music, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff I talked about before, really important, even though I just said blah, blah, blah. But all that important stuff that I talked about before, explain that to your team and then hold them accountable to it. And once you hold people accountable to that, then they're probably going to make an effort to be at worship rehearsals. And then if they can't make it to worship rehearsals, they'll realize that they can't be on the worship team. And you might have less people on your worship team for a little while, but you will build a stronger foundation for the worship team that you will build in the future. So all of that to say, if someone can't make it to your worship rehearsal, I'm sorry. You can't play with us on Sunday. You won't play with us on Sunday. So, tough question, but I hope you enjoyed my answer. If you disagree with me, which I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who disagree with me, let me know down in the comments below. I don't hate you if you have a different opinion. I think that this is a complicated question, and I'm not sure that I have the right answer. I'm just sharing my thoughts with you. So I'd love to hear anything that I missed down in the comments below. Also, make sure to check out down in the description below, speaking of worship rehearsals, that free worship rehearsal blueprint that I put together that will allow you to have the best worship rehearsal you've ever had. There's 5 parts to it. It will lead your team spiritually, relationally, and musically. Check it out in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.